Please give Rabbi Taub a very, very warm welcome. And I look forward to our wonderful session together, which will be followed by a Q&A, dear friends.
Excellent. Thank you, Rabbi Kalmenson. And I'm very glad that you admit publicly that we're good friends, Baruch Hashem. And I will try to live up to everything that description demands. I also want to, I don't know if an apology is in order. In England, you could always apologize for everything. So why not? I'll apologize profusely for the drab background. It's 3 p.m. here in New York, and I'm still at seminary. Once a week, I come into Brooklyn and I study with the seminary girls. These are 18 and 19-year-old young women post-high school getting prepared to be the next leaders and educators of our generation. So happens to be Wednesday's my day. I come to Brooklyn and I just finished one class and then I came to the teacher's lounge, the lush and opulent teacher's lounge of Beit Baruch Seminary, and I'm with you. And this is a lot better than flying across the Atlantic and having to land at Heathrow. So thank God for modern technology. Okay, let's talk about today's topic of under the hood. Jackie Mason, all of us Shalom, has a joke. He says there's a husband and a wife driving together, taking a drive in the country, and all of a sudden the car starts to make noise and it stops running and they have to pull over. And the husband says to the wife about the car trouble. Well, of course, he's the man, so he has to, act like he knows what's going on. So he says to his wife, I think it's something under the hood. And that's Jackie Mason's joke for, somebody making a statement that's totally vague and meaningless, but pretending that they know what's going on. So it's something under the hood, right? Imagine if you would go to your doctor and you would complain of whatever symptoms are ailing you, and he would say, I know what it is. It's something inside your body. Yeah, of course, I know. It's something inside. What's going on? Which system, which organ, tell me what's going on. So something under the hood is just a starting point. We got to get to what is it? What's going on? What are the parts? What are the systems? How do they interact? What's the anatomy, if you will, of the soul? And that's what we're going to get into tonight. We're going to talk about the composition of the soul, what its inner makeup is, how it works, and then we're going to get into some practical application. Once we know how the soul is functioning, then we can start to talk about how to use our soul, how to access it, and to apply it in our lives. So let's start with a basic concept. One of the most basic Hasidic concepts is the idea that the entire physical universe is a mirror reflection of spiritual realities. That anything that exists down here on the terrestrial plane is a derivation of a higher spiritual reality. In fact, I'll tell you something interesting. I saw a letter from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe wrote many, many letters to various individuals of all walks of life. And many of these letters have been published. One of these letters is a letter to a scholar. Not all of the letters are to scholars. Some letters are to just regular individuals asking about personal issues. But this letter happens to be to a scholar. And this scholar was asking the Rebbe why he doesn't find so many metaphors in Chabad teachings. Now, when I first read that letter, I was sort of taken aback because there are a lot of metaphors in Chabad teachings. But when I read the Rebbe's response further, I understood what the person was saying. He was talking about a particular style of Hasidic teaching where they don't just use metaphors, they use extended metaphors, an entire story with characters and dialogue and a whole protracted, lengthy, almost you could call it a fairy tale or a legend with a conflict and a good guy and a bad guy and a resolution. And it's true, in Chabad Hasidic teachings, you don't have those kinds of metaphors. It's more very short metaphors. So I'll tell you what the Rebbe answered. The Rebbe said that normally metaphors are used as a rhetorical device. When one person wants to teach another person about something for which they have no reference point. If I'm trying to describe something to you that you have a reference point for, so it's easy to begin with. I want to tell you about an apple, and you never saw this apple. So I say to you, it's like an apple, but it's not red, it's green. Oh, and it's not sweet, it's tart. Oh, and that's a Granny Smith apple. Okay, so if you never saw a Granny Smith apple, but apples, you've eaten other apples, so I can build on what you know. But let's say you never saw an apple. Let's say you never saw a piece of fruit. So I got to figure out something that you do know that shares some similarity to this thing that you don't know, and then build a bridge from the familiar to the unfamiliar. So the Rebbe says in this letter that very often a communicator will use metaphors merely as a rhetorical device for effective communication. He says, but in Chabad Hasidic teachings, that doesn't happen. That's not how metaphors are used. And that's why there are fewer occasions where metaphors come up. What then is a metaphor in Chabad Hasidic teachings? So the Rebbe says like this. I just found it so powerful when I read these words. When a Rebbe, a Hasidic master, uses a metaphor, he's not comparing one thing to another thing. Rather, he is describing one thing as it coexists simultaneously on two planes of reality. So, for instance, if we say that the 6 emotional faculties of the world of emanation and their relationship with the attribute of royalty is mirrored in the relationship between the 6 work days and the Sabbath. We're not comparing the 6 emotional faculties of the attribute of royalty in the world of emanation to the 6 work days and the Sabbath. We're saying it's one and the same thing. In the world of emanation, they're the 6 emotional faculties and the attribute of royalty. In time, it's called 6 work days and the Sabbath. In personae, it's called groom and bride. And in various different levels, and here's not the time to go into that, but perhaps sometime you'll ask Rabbi Kalmenson to learn with you the Rebbe's marriage discourse called L'Chadoidi, which explains all of this wonderfully. And I recommend to anyone who's getting married, thinking of getting married, to learn that discourse. But the point is that Rebbe said an amazing thing, that when we compare metaphorically one thing to another thing, we're not just saying they bear some resemblance to each other. What we're saying is that one is a derivative of the other. So, one of the most basic Kabbalistic concepts is the idea of the 10 spheros. 10 sphirot. What are the 10 sphirot? It's a hard word to translate, but for convenience sake, let's call it 10 emanations. It basically explains the problem of how the infinite relates to the finite. How can the infinite have a relationship with the finite that will be meaningful to the finite. So the explanation is that the infinite encloses itself into different facets or different contexts. So there's the context of God's kindness, called chesed, and there's the context of God's severity, called gvura, and so on and so forth. These are different contexts within which we experience divinity. Obviously, God being infinite is beyond all of them, but he uses these contexts in order that we should be able to experience him. Okay, so those are the 10 sfirot. These same 10 aspects or qualities, which are called the 10 sfirot, are then repeated in the makeup of the soul. Sort of like if you've ever studied mathematics, the idea of fractals. You know, in nature, you find fractals, like the shape of a leaf is the same as the outline of the tree. You ever notice that? Like a coniferous tree, like a pine tree. So it has the leaf is like a little needle. And the shape of the tree itself is very long and narrow. Or you look at an oak tree, that the outline of an oak leaf. Or if you're Canadian, look at a maple leaf, right? The maple leaf on the Canadian flag. So look at the shape of a maple leaf and look at it compared to the maple tree. The outline of the maple tree is similar to the outline of the leaf. Those are called fractals, where you have patterns that repeat or reiterate themselves. We find this all over in nature. The point is that Hashem, the infinite, relates to the finite through 10 sfirot, 10 divine emanations. And that pattern is exactly repeated in the makeup of the soul. So that when we describe what is the soul and what is its makeup, well, to begin with, it is composed of 10 faculties. We call them kochot, powers or potentials. And these 10 powers, potentials, faculties are exactly the same as the 10 sfirot. They have the same names, the same configuration. When you map them, I don't know if anyone's familiar with, if you've ever seen the Kabbalistic Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, where the sfirot are depicted in a schema of right and left and center axis. So that mapping of the sfirot, that's the same as the mapping of the soul's qualities. So what does that mean? That means like this. If you want to discuss what is a soul is an entity comprised of potentials, capacities. More specifically, 10 capacities. More specifically than that, what are these 10 capacities? There are 3 cognitive capacities and 7 emotional capacities. The 3 cognitive capacities you may be familiar with, it may ring a bell if I tell you the Hebrew names, are Chochma, Bina, Da'at, which the acronym is Chabad. Chabad is well known today as a place that if you're traveling and you can't find kosher food, so you call Chabad and they'll have a kosher roast beef sandwich for you, right? Everybody knows Chabad today is that. Chabad is not a social services organization. Chabad is not even outreach. You know what Chabad is? Chabad is a school of mysticism based on the idea of using the 3 intellectual capacities, using the Chochma, Bina, Da'at, using your intellectual capacities to study mysticism, to meditate and to contemplate. And this was the Alter Rebbe. Actually, I have this book that I was learning with the seminary students just now. This is the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya, the first Chabad Rebbe. He started the school of Chabad. So he believed in experience, as opposed to some of his colleagues, which believed in spiritual ecstasy and emotionalism. He believed in the Chabad, the Chochma Bina Dat, the cognitive faculties, that through learning and reflection and contemplation and meditation, one could come into a state of profound connection to God. So at any rate, so those are the three cognitive or intellectual faculties. And we can speak in a moment what the difference is between the three. But then let's talk about the other category, the remaining seven. There are the seven emotional faculties, and those are Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchut. 7 faculties, emotional faculties. That is the entire emotional palette. So every feeling that a person can have, whether it's love or it's awe, they all fit into these 7 categories. Now, here's the really important point. The relationship between these 3 cognitive faculties and these 7 emotional faculties. That's what I want you to hear. The relationship between them. Chochmah, Bina, Da'at, the 3 intellectual faculties, are called father, mother, and their intimate bond. Chochmah is the father, Bina is the mother, Da'at is the intimate bond. The word Da'at means knowledge, as in Adam knew Eve. What does it mean, Adam knew Eve? It doesn't mean he could pick her out of a lineup. Of course he could pick her out of a lineup. She was the only woman in the world. Yes, officer, it was that woman, right? He knew her means he was intimate with her. So Da'at means intimacy. When Chochmah and Bina become intimate, that means Chochmah is inventiveness, innovation, having an idea. Aha, eureka. Bina is then analyzing it, taking it apart, testing it, seeing if it actually makes sense, getting closer to the idea of how would it actually be applied. So when Chochmah and Bina are intimate, what happens? They have babies. Like any father and mother are intimate and they have babies. Who are the children of the intellect? The emotions. And this is so important, so important, that the 3 intellectual faculties are the parents of the 7 emotional faculties. Why is this so important? Why is it important to know where babies come from? It's important because we all experience emotions. Do we know where our emotions come from? Now, when I say emotions, I mean true emotions, not sensations. I want to make a distinction so that this shouldn't be misunderstood. Sometimes in English, we misuse the word feeling. We say, I'm feeling cold, I'm feeling hot, I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling excited, I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm feeling hungry. Those are sensations. And those have to do with the body. And they're not generated cerebrally. It's not any cognitive process that led to those quote unquote feelings. That's basically basic brain stuff, survival stuff. And that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about are true emotions, such as love, not lust, not attraction, but the emotion of love. Or awe. Awe is an emotion. Awe is actually the opposite of emotion as love. Love is a compelling desire to get closer to something or someone. Awe is a compelling desire to back away in awe, in reverence, to give space. So those are emotions. Now, emotions can be positive, emotions can be negative. If I have a love of God and therefore a love of all of his creatures, that will serve me well in life. Then I will be a source of benevolence and charity, and I'll be a good guy. If I have an awe of God, that will also serve me well in life, because then I'll remember to only be in awe of God and not to live cowering in fear of people, places, and things that I have no control over. It'll embolden me. When you have awe of God, then you have less fear of anything else. But then there are emotions that don't serve me well, where I have a love for something that I don't think is good for me, or I'm in awe of something, I'm afraid of something, I'm living in fear of something that's holding me back in life. So those are not positive emotions. How do I get more of the positive emotions and less of the negative ones? If I wanted to target, if I wanted to make a goal and deliberately, consciously generate more desirable emotions and less undesirable emotions, where would I even begin? So that's why it's incredibly important to know where emotions come from. Emotions are the children of cognition, intellect. Therefore, I have to realize that anything I'm feeling, and again, I'm not talking about sensations. Those happen instantaneously. Those are reflex reactions. That's on a basic survival level of the body. But I'm talking about an emotion that was produced by a certain line of thinking, and it was enhanced and magnified through perseverating on that line of thinking. I have to realize that, for instance, if I'm living with a constant worry over something, that feeling didn't just crop up out of nowhere. I've meditated myself into that state. Think about it. I keep myself up at night thinking about, imagining something that I don't want. They call it catastrophizing. I'm thinking about the catastrophe. And because I'm focusing my mental energy, my chokhmah, bina, and dat, the father, the mother, and their intimate connection, they're having babies, they're creating emotions, and I'm full of these feelings. Or let's say I have a resentment. Resentment is a wonderful example. I mean, it's not a wonderful thing to have, but it's a wonderful example. It serves as a very effective example of this principle. A resentment literally means a resentiment. Resentment from the Latin root sentire, which means to feel. So a resentment is a resentiment. It's re-feeling something. Why are you re-feeling it? Because you're meditating on it. Yes, it's a meditation. Somebody hurt me 10 years ago, 3,000 miles away. And now I'm driving down the highway and I'm remembering the insult. I'm remembering the betrayal. And I'm meditating. My mind is I've heard some people call it visiting the museum. That when you go and you relive the hurt, it's called visiting the museum. And the curator is a genius. You know, each of us have this museum that we've built in our own minds, dedicated to our own suffering. And the curator, we are the curator, and we have very effective exhibits. Everyone who leaves this museum leaves in tears. There's only one person who goes to it, but everyone who leaves in tears. And there's not even a gift shop, but it's open at 3 a.m. So we keep going back there, you know? So it's 3 a.m. and we're going to the museum and we're revisiting the insult, the betrayal, and we're re-feeling it. We're getting fresh, new emotions. And hey, if you're Jewish and you like a bargain, that's a real bargain, because you got hurt once 10 years ago and you could keep milking it from more negative emotions as long as you wish, because as long as you go back and you run it through your mind, you're going to get new emotions, because that's where emotions come from. So one of the messages of Tanya is, and this is so profound, you cannot directly attempt to control your emotions. You can't tell yourself, stop feeling that way. It won't work. But what you can do is indirectly, you can change your meditations. And when you change your meditations, you'll change the emotions that are born, literally, that are born from those meditations. There's a story from one of the early Hasidic masters, actually the Alter Rebbe, the one who started Chabad. So his master was the Maggid of Mezrich. The Maggid of Mezrich was the teacher of many, many of the leaders of Hasidism. Virtually every Hasidic dynasty traces itself back to one of the students of the Maggid of Mezrich. Mezrich is a town in Poland. Actually, I'll tell you, for those who are into psychology, but there was an interview with Carl Jung on his 80th birthday, and he said something remarkable. He said, the one who anticipated my entire psychology lived in the 1700s. His name was Rabbi Bear of Mezrich. So yeah, Carl Jung says that his entire psychology was taken from the Maggid of Mezrich, Rabbi Bear, Rabbi Dov Bear. So this particular Rabbi Dov Bear of Mezrich, he was approached by someone who complained of having stray thoughts, what we call machshavot zarot, foreign thoughts, unwanted thoughts. And he wanted to know how to address this problem. So the Maggid told him, go to Zhitomir, the city of Zhitomir, and there you will find my disciple Reb Zev. Reb Zev of Zhitomir will help you to learn how to deal with unwanted thoughts. So this Jew traveled to Zhitomir. He didn't know anyone in Zhitomir, but when he got there, he asked around. He asked, where does Reb Zev live? Now, they didn't have addresses in those days. So someone described to him, however they described it. You go to this house and take a left, and then you see the chickens in the yard, and you take a right, however they described it to him. And he got to Reb Zev's house, and it was Friday afternoon, Erev Shabbat. So he knocks on the door, and in those days, it's not like you could just call somebody and say, hey, I'm going to be in Zhitomir next week. Can you put me up for Shabbos? You know, this is the way it was back then. People would just knock at your door and say, hi, are you home? Remember that? When people would actually come to your door? Yeah, in America, it's dangerous to knock at someone's door. Second Amendment. Knock at someone's door, you never know what they're opening the door with. Anyways, yeah. But in those days, you could just knock at somebody's door. And that's what you had to do. You write them a letter, it could take a month to get there, right? So he knocks at the door, and he hears people inside. He can distinctly hear there are people. I mean, it's Friday afternoon in a Jewish house. Everybody knows the hustle and bustle of a Jewish house on Friday afternoon. So he can hear people inside running around, getting ready for Shabbos, and he's knocking on the door, and nobody's answering. So it's Friday afternoon. He's got his bags with him. He has to put them down somewhere. He has to settle down for Shabbos. What's he supposed to do? He doesn't know anyone else in this town. He only came to Zhitomir to meet this Reb Zev, so he knocks again a little bit more insistently. Still, he hears people running around. No one's answering the door. He knocks again. He knocks. He's pounding. Nobody's answering the door. He feels like he's being ignored. Finally, he sees the sun's getting lower and lower. He's got no choice. He takes his bags and he walks to shul. And in those days, the poor and the indigent, the homeless, they would sleep in shul and they would eat in shul. That's why Kiddush was made in shul on Friday night for people who didn't have a house to go to. They had no hospitality. They had nowhere to be a guest. So they would just sleep in shul and eat in shul. And that's what happened to him. He was homeless for that Shabbos. Anyways, after Shabbos, a stranger comes over to him and introduces himself as Reb Zev of Zhitomir. This is the guy he was looking for. This is the guy whose house he was at on Friday afternoon. He was pounding on the door. He says, my name is Zev. He says, you're Reb Zev? He says, yeah. He says, come to my house. I want to bring you to my house. So now it's Saturday night. It's after Shabbos. He brings him to his house, and they make Havdalah, and he serves him Malav Malka, the meal for after Shabbos. And it's very lovely, and they're talking, and they're discussing deep ideas, and very, very warm hospitality, but something's bothering him. Like, what happened Friday afternoon? This Zev seems very hospitable, very, very generous. But Friday afternoon, I was knocking at his door and he didn't answer the door. And I know he heard me, so he can't hold back anymore. So he wasn't English. So if he would have been English, he would have gone home and he told his wife, I don't know what was up with this guy. He made me homeless for Shabbos. Did you mention something? No, I didn't mention anything, but I gave him a very stern look. Anyways, but he wasn't English. He was Polish. So he said, listen, Reb Zev, it's very nice here, but I gotta confront you about something. What happened Friday afternoon? Your Rebbe, Rabbi Dovber of Mezrich, sent me to you expressly for one purpose. You were supposed to teach me how to handle my stray thoughts. You were supposed to teach me how to handle stray thoughts. That's what your Rebbe wanted you to do. And I come to your house, I don't know anyone else in Zhitomir, and I'm knocking on the door, and I heard you inside, and I know you were there, and you ignored me? Why did you do it to me? So Reb Zev says to the guy, the Rebbe sent you to me to teach you how to handle your stray thoughts? He says, yes. He says, well, that was the first lesson I taught you when you arrived in Zhitomir. That when there's a knock at the door, it doesn't mean I open it. And the guest suddenly understood that this was the lesson. There will be a knock at the door. There will be the impulse for intrusive thoughts. We will not be free from the knock, from the distraction. But we do get to choose whether we open the door. Two very, very different things. Very different things. We can control what we think about, not what we think of. I saw in Brooklyn, I was driving around looking for a parking spot, and I drove past a guy's driveway, and he had a sign in the driveway that said, "Don't even think of parking here." And you know what happened when I read that sign? I thought of parking there. I didn't park there, but that would be like renting a billboard on the highway that says, "Don't think of an elephant on roller skates." Boom, you all lost. You can't control what you think of. You can control what you think about. What you think of, thinking of means it popped up in your mind. Maybe some of us are too young to remember the early days of the internet. But if you remember the early days of the internet, the biggest problem were the pop-up ads on the browsers. And sometimes those pop-up ads were not very savory. So what are you supposed to do when you have a pop-up ad and like, well, why are they showing me that? I don't want that. So you go to the X, the little red X, and you click it off. So it's not your fault that you got a pop-up ad. You didn't ask for that. Your responsibility is, as soon as you recognize that it's an inappropriate ad, you're going to click it off. Now the question becomes, okay, how long do I have to click the X and make it go away? You know, maybe I'll take my own sweet time before I get rid of the image. And the answer is as fast as is neurologically possible. So as soon as you recognize it as something that you wouldn't have purposely sought out, now you got to get rid of it as fast as you can. And that's where your power of choice begins. But the fact that it popped up on your screen, you had no choice over that, and you are not to be blamed. It's the same thing with thinking. There's the thinking of and there's the thinking about. So our minds will cause us to think of many things. We could think of things that are horrific. We could think of things that are absolutely antithetical to our own value system, things that are appalling to us. And a person could become obsessed with self-loathing and living in dread and fear of when these thoughts will come up again. And the Tanya says, here's good news. You're really not accountable for, and you're not really expected to do anything about what you think of. Or in the language of the story of Reb Zev, it's not your fault who chooses to knock at your door. But where do you have power? When you open the door. So we all know the difference between something popped up in my brain, that's the knock at the door, and now I've opened it, I've let it come in, I gave it a seat, I told it, here, let me bring you some tea, relax. Now I've embraced it, I'm running with it, I'm engaged in a fantasy where I'm willfully thinking this thought. Now I'm engaged in a behavior. And for that, I should have exercised choice. It's a very interesting thing. Tanya calls thought a behavior. Tanya calls thought a behavior. It's interesting because we know that action, if I get up and I walk around, that's a behavior. Or even if I speak, if I say something, that's a behavior. And I understand that I'm morally accountable for my behaviors. I have to make good choices what I do. I can't go over and punch you. I have to control myself no matter how angry I am. And I can't go over and insult you. I can't speak to you hurtful words. I have to control what I say. But what about thinking? What about thinking? Am I morally accountable for what I think about? And the answer is, again, not what you think of, but what you think about. Not who knocks at the door, but for whom you open it. And this can be very empowering, and it can also reduce a lot of shame and guilt, unnecessary shame and guilt, when we realize that we're capable of having all types of impulses. I had a teacher who was very well known. He just passed away this year, Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky. And he told a story about when he took a moral test, a questionnaire that was supposed to test his morality for a job that he was applying for in a hospital. And one of the questions was, do you think you're capable of murder? So he wrote yes. So they said, why did you write you're capable of murder? He said, because the Torah forbids murder. And if the Torah has to forbid it, it means it's a human impulse. It doesn't mean that I go around plotting murder. It doesn't mean that I go around fantasizing about it. But it means I'm surely capable of the impulse. And that's what Torah is addressing when it says, don't murder. So the fact that we're capable of having an impulse, the fact that the idea can pop up, so to speak, that's part of being human. That's part of the human condition. And we have no fault, we have no blame for being human. How can you blame me for being as I am? Where my accountability begins is when I go from the impulse for a thought to actual, deliberate, willful, active thought. I'll give you another example. Think to yourself the times tables. Just in your mind, think to yourself the times tables, like 3 times 4 is 12, 3 times 5 is 15, whatever you want. You don't have to show off and do tough ones like 12 times 11. Nobody else can hear. You can just think in your mind. Okay, so let's do it for like 10 seconds, okay? Just wherever you want. 7 times 3 is 21, whatever you want to do. Okay, let's do it for 10 seconds. Okay, you did it? All right. So please notice the fact that everybody is comfortable with me referring to this as doing. I said, did you do it? You did it? Yeah, I did it. Nobody said, I was just thinking. I wasn't doing anything. Why? Because you understand intuitively that a willful mental process is a behavior, albeit a behavior that you engage in your own head, but it's a behavior. So when I said, did you do it? It doesn't have to be I got up and I walked across the room. It doesn't even have to be that I verbally spoke something out loud. It could just be that I was thinking the times table. So we understand that thought is a behavior. Now, conversely, what if I were to ask you, okay, so you were thinking the times tables a minute ago when I asked you to do so. Were you thinking the times tables an hour ago? No, I wasn't thinking the times tables an hour ago. Okay, did you know the times tables an hour ago? Oh yeah, I've known the times tables for years. So there's a difference between knowing and thinking. Because you've known the times tables for years. In fact, you've not only known it for years, but every moment within those years, you've known it all along. You've always known it. So that if I ever stopped you on the street, anytime since you were 8 years old, and I would have said, say the times tables, you could have done it for me because you've known it every second. Imagine all the places you've been since you were 8 years old, all the people you've met, all the experiences you've had. At every single juncture, you had the times table somewhere in the hard drive. You've known it all along. But then contrast that with how many places and times and on how many occasions were you actively thinking times tables? Probably not so many. So there's a difference between knowing and thinking. And why is that good news? Because we can know all types of stuff that we wish we didn't know. And it doesn't harm us unless we actively welcome it as a chosen thought. Very, very important information here. That A, emotions are the children of thought, the children of cognition. But B, we're not responsible for who the parents are. We're responsible for whether or not we allow them to be fruitful. We allow them to create emotions by engaging in the intellectual process. So what does this mean? It means that we've now learned an incredibly effective tool in indirectly eliminating negative emotional states. I say indirectly because you can't directly just banish these emotional states. You can't just say, well, that's silly to feel that way. You know, they say feelings aren't facts. Yeah, but feelings are feelings. I really do feel this way. You can't just tell yourself, well, that's absurd to feel that way. Stop feeling that way. But I'm feeling that way. You can't just do that. But what you can do indirectly is you can say, what thought process did I engage in that got me feeling this way? And now just be a little bit more mindful the next time there's a knock at the door saying, hey, let's think about this worry. Let's think about this resentment. Let's think about this thing that you have anxiety about. Let's think about this, this shameful secret. And we could say, you know what? I've thought of it. It popped up on the screen. I thought of it, but it's not going farther than that. I'm not going to think about it. Get rid of it. And if you can't get rid of it, then think about something else. It's perfectly legitimate to battle unwanted thoughts through preoccupation. Go distract yourself. I want to tell you something. If you don't purposely choose your distraction, you're going to end up by default choosing the easiest, cheapest distraction, which is essentially what addiction is. When you're choosing unhealthy distractions instead of being mindful and selective and choosing some distractions that actually might have some benefit to you. For instance, taking a Torah class and then pondering its meaning. What would be so terrible? Would it be such a sin at 3 a.m. that the worry and resentment and dread and shame come to you and say, hey, we got an idea for you to think about until sunrise? And you say, no, I'm going to think about the Torah class that I attended this week. And so you can knock at the door, but I'm not going to have you in for tea. And I'm not going to allow you to create emotions. Now, I want to tell you one more idea here. And then I guess we'll do a little Q&A, a little interaction. But here's the bad news. I told you a lot of good news. I'm going to tell you some bad news. The good news was that negative meditations won't turn into emotions if we don't allow them to become full-fledged thought processes. That was the good news. The bad news is the positive emotions will also not become full-fledged emotions unless we engage in full-fledged thought processes. So that means there's a lot of wholesome, healing, positive information that we're carrying around with us in our brains, but we haven't been thinking about it consciously, so it's not creating an emotional effect. This is what the Torah says. You should know today, you should place it upon your heart. Those are two different stages. Knowing something, okay, you know the times tables. Placing it upon your heart means actively thinking about it. So I'll tell you a quick story. I took a sort of ad hoc writer's retreat by myself about 10 years ago. I was trying to finish the translation of the second volume of Tanya, which is all about cosmology, very deep stuff. And I was having a really hard time finishing it. So my wife told me, our son, who I think he's, how old is he now? He's 18, 19. So he was like 8 years old at the time. So this is 10 years ago. So she said to go with him. He was going to a camp. How do I describe this camp? This was a winter camp for Shluchim's kids. Shluchim are like the emissaries of Chabad all over the world. And so they have a winter camp where these little kids get together. Some of them are from very far-flung areas, so this is really their only opportunity for some social interaction. And so it was in the middle of the desert in Arizona. My wife said, go with our son for 10 days, and it'll be a writer's retreat. And it was amazing. And I went there and I said to them, listen, I'm here to write. So I'm not going to, please don't ask me to speak to the kids because I'm just here to write. And they said, that's fine. So for 10 days, I was in the desert. I was just writing and it was amazing. In 10 days in the desert, I wrote more and I finished the whole project there. I wrote more than I could write in 6 months at home. So anyways, on the last day I had finished and they said to me, oh, will you talk to the kids now? I said, yeah, I'm free to talk to the kids now, but my head's not in that. I've just been translating very deep spiritual mystical concepts, esoteric ideas, abstruse ideas. I'm not really in the mode to talk to children. They said, it's fine. It's the last day. Like, how bad could it be? So I went to talk to the kids and I didn't even know what to tell them. So I started to tell them what I was working on. I told them, that verse that I told you before, you should know today, you should place upon your heart. That's actually the first line of the second volume of Tanya. He said, you should know today and place it upon your heart. That God is God in the heavens above, on the earth below, there is nothing else. So I was trying to explain to them, what does that mean? You should know today and you should place it upon your heart. So I was trying to think of a metaphor that would apply to them. And I know these are kids who are, many of them are from very far-flung, remote, isolated areas, isolated at least in terms of Jewish community, of Jewish infrastructure. So I knew that for them, in their experience, one of the things that they really enjoyed was when they would go with their family to New York and they would get to go to a kosher restaurant. Because many of these children, the only time they would go to a restaurant would be if they're in New York. So I said to them, you know how you go to New York and your family's going to go out to eat and you have to pick, are you going to go for pizza or are you going to go for shawarma, right? Because there's milchiks and there's fleishiks, there's dairy and there's meat. So it's either going to be pizza, it's going to be shawarma. And you have to vote who wants pizza and who wants shawarma. And your sister is holding the phone. She's ready to make the order and she's taking a vote. It's a whole democracy over here. And she's saying, what do you want? You want pizza or you want shawarma? Pizza, shawarma, pizza. And they come to you and you say, I need a minute. Give me a minute. I said to them, why do you need a minute? You know what pizza is. You know what shawarma is. Tell them what you want. Why do you need a minute? But I'll tell you why you need a minute. You need a minute because you've known about pizza for many years. You've known about shawarma, but you haven't been thinking about them because somebody just reminded you of them 10 seconds ago. So what do? You say, hold on, give me a minute and let me think about it. Let me meditate on pizza. Let me meditate on shawarma. And then after a minute, you turn to them and you say, I feel like pizza. Meaning I've known about pizza for years, but I didn't have an emotional desire for pizza or not for pizza until I actively meditated on it, until I ran it through my head as an active thought process. So I said to them, it's one thing to know about Hashem. It's another thing to meditate, to think about Hashem, even for a minute. Just like you said to your sister, give me a minute to think what I want for dinner. So I said to them, think about Hashem for 60 seconds. And it was remarkable. For 60 seconds. And I timed it on my watch. And at the end of those 60 seconds, I asked these little children, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, 11 years old. That's how old they were, 8, 9, 10, 11. I asked them to tell me what emotions they were having. It was so remarkable. One of them said, I feel safe. Another said, I feel peaceful. I feel happy. I was thinking safe and peaceful and happy. Listen to that. If we could sell that to the pharmaceutical industry, we'd be billionaires. And you know the joke of it? We don't have to sell it to the pharmaceutical industry because even the mind of a child can generate these emotions if they'll just think for 60 seconds. So here's the quote unquote bad news that I want to tell you. We know things that if we were to focus on them would bring us a great deal of healing. But unless we choose to focus on them, unless we run them through this machine called the brain, they're not going to result in emotions. And I want to tell you something. This is true for the biggest rabbis who know so much Torah. But it doesn't help you to be walking around with a library in your head. It doesn't help you to know things. And if somebody will ask me, I'll know the answer. That doesn't translate into your emotional state. You know what translates into your emotional state? What have you been thinking about as of late? So I always plead with my students whenever I give a class. The class is worthless if you don't chew your food and swallow it and metabolize it and allow it to become your flesh and blood. And that means after you've heard something good, you sat, you listened to a teacher, you heard something good, go take a walk around the block and say it back to yourself in your own words. Come up with your own metaphors. Come up with your own imagery. Come up with your own examples from your life. And that's called thinking. That's meditating. That's what we're contemplating, is just have a discussion with yourself, an internal monologue where you take these ideas and you churn over them and look at them from different angles, and then you'll have an emotional takeaway. But you could study and study and study and study and keep cramming information in your head, and it won't translate into the types of emotions that we desire until you engage in some degree. And it could be a minute a day. I highly, highly recommend to everyone a minute of Torah meditation a day. Now, obviously, to do a minute of Torah meditation every day, you have to be studying, because in order to have what to meditate on, you have to study. But don't just study and then leave the best part of it behind by not engaging in your own creative, personal thought process, where you're going to take all those rich ideas and turn them into feelings. Okay, there's so much more to be said, but I'm gonna open the floor here, and I'll take your questions.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Rabbi Taub. I think that was a really beautiful overview and a very practical takeaway. Frankly, I think if if we bottled this and we went to market, we'd be doing extremely well. So let me try to bring it home a little bit for some of the people out here. From time to time, I get a couple who come to see me, a husband, a wife, a young man or woman, or later in their years of relationship. And one of them will say to me in confidence and privacy or in front of their spouse or partner, typically actually alone, I've lost the feeling. Some will even say, I never had the feeling. They'll say somehow it happened, this, that, circumstances brought us together, and one thing led to another, and we were in a relationship, and here we are 10 years, 20 years down the line, and I don't have anything to try to rekindle because there never was something. Or in the case of another couple, there was something, but it was lost. Or let's take the other extreme. Someone will say, I have developed an attachment, an emotional draw and attachment to someone who isn't good for me. So they're either, God forbid, in a relationship already, and they've become attracted to someone outside of that relationship, which you can imagine can wreak terrible havoc, is immoral, is inappropriate, etc. Or someone who's not yet in a marital relationship, but has grown attached to someone who they know is not good for them on multiple levels. So how do we generate an emotion if there wasn't anything there to begin with? Or how do we rekindle something, but that may be slightly easier? Or how do we get rid of or somehow uproot an emotion that is not serving us? And so that's the question.
So first of all, that's a very relevant question. So I want to, before I attempt to answer, I want to make clear what I can respond to and what I can't respond to. Because obviously human beings are complex and relationships are complex, and there could be many, many factors involved. But if we'll set aside some of the other factors and just focus, let's say, on a situation where somebody says, I'm gonna, because it's a hypothetical or it's a general question, I'll tailor make it a little bit to make it easier to answer, sort of isolating some other variables. Let's say somebody says, I want to have a feeling. Like, I wish I did. I would like to. They're not resistant to it, but what do you want me to do? I don't have the feeling, okay? Or conversely, I don't want to have this feeling. I don't want to have this feeling for this person, but what do you want me to do? I've told myself to stop, and I can't stop feeling the feeling. So the first thing to do is to validate that and say, you're 100% right. You cannot banish a feeling or order yourself to have a feeling at will. Can't be done. And you shouldn't feel any frustration or disappointment with yourself over the fact that you are human and you cannot just command yourself to have or not have feelings. It doesn't work that way. What we can do, this is what we're speaking about, is indirectly generate feelings through the cognitive process. So, people talk about, in general, like, let's say, having a positive attitude about life. Write a gratitude list. Figure out, what are you grateful for? It's corny, it's sappy, but every morning, write a list, 10 things you're grateful for. And you'll start to feel more grateful. Same thing. You want to love somebody? Don't order yourself to love them. Start thinking about 2 things, 3 things. Start a short list of things that you appreciate about this person. And what you will find is that without directly trying to get yourself to have a feeling, you'll look back and say, whoa, all of a sudden, there is something there. I mean, let me ask you a question. I'm asking Mendel, I'll ask you directly. Okay, I think I'm an audits. I'm very ignorant in these things, but I think England was in the World Cup recently. Is that true?
Last year, I believe.
What?
I believe last year they were in a very big match. I don't remember the details.
Okay, so I'm wondering if this is the right question to ask you, but
It's too soon, too soon.
too soon. That's for tragedy.
They lost, I think.
But by the way, I hate to confess my ignorance, but did England win the World Cup or they lost? I think they won, didn't
No,
they?
they lost. They lost.
They lost? Oh, that's why I said too soon.
Yeah, of course.
Too soon. Oh, okay. So I brought up, okay, but this is an excellent example.
That's the
So-
museum no one wants to revisit.
Okay, perfect. But well, we could work with this. Here's my question for you. When you were a teenager, did you have a sports team that you cared about? I don't know, the Giants, I don't know. You had a team that you...
For the sake of this discussion, okay, yes.
Okay, so you weren't into sports at all. Fine,
No.
so you weren't into sports at all. But I wanted to ask you a question. If when you were 15 years old, you heard that England lost the World Cup, would it mean anything to you?
At the time, no, definitely not.
Mean nothing to you. Okay. And now I'm asking you about it. And I mean, you were joking. You say, oh, too soon. But
No, it meant something more because there was such a, I've because over the past 10 years, I've begun to identify with this country, of course.
okay.
Yes.
So there was some type of a feeling.
Yeah, yes, I guess so.
There was something. It wasn't maybe the most
Right.
intense emotion, but there was something there. It wasn't like me, like I'm totally ambivalent about it. I don't
Right.
care. I don't care
Right.
who won the World Cup. But there was something there. Now, where does that come from? In other words, what I'm asking is, let's identify, where does that emotion, maybe you didn't have the most intense feeling about the World Cup, but you had some feeling, and 20 years ago, you didn't have any feeling. You didn't have any feeling about the entire sport. So there's a concept, you said it, you alluded to it, you feel some type of identity with the people of this country that you live in. There's such a concept where sometimes I'm having trouble thinking myself into an emotion for whatever reason. I can't focus. Maybe I'm just not that deep of a thinker. So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, he actually gives a backup plan. He says, if you can't intellectualize yourself, now plan A is to do it intellectually. And that's the most powerful, because when you've put the time into thinking about something, that's when you're going to really have permanent emotional change. That's the best way to do it. But if you can't do that, then at least think in terms of identity. You said, I don't know, yeah, it affects me whether England wins the World Cup. I live in this country. I've identified with these people. I've identified with the aspirations of this culture. Yeah, it affects me. So he says it, the Alter Rebbe says it in terms of Jewish identity, that when you want to do a mitzvah and you're feeling the motivation is lacking. So the first thing to do is try to meditate yourself into a love of God. But if you can't meditate yourself into a love of God, if you can't do it intellectually, he says, then at least just do it. There's a shortcut, there's a roundabout way, a side door, which is think about your identity. But I'm a Jew. But I'm a Jew. And if they came and they forced me to convert, like in the Inquisition and the pogroms, if they held the sword to my head, I would all of a sudden be super Jew and I'd have the spiritual adrenaline rush and I would do anything for my Judaism. So sometimes, to go back to your question about somebody who wants to feel more in a relationship, the best way to do it is make that gratitude list, try to intellectualize yourself there, think, put in time, think about it, think about the relationship, think about the sacrifices you've made for each other, think about the investment, think about the qualities of this person, and emotions should arise. But if that's not happening, or it's not happening fast enough, then the side door is think about identity. Think about identity. This is my spouse. This is the parent of my children. This is my partner. And sometimes just the idea of identity can be a side door to creating emotions, just like you probably don't follow the statistics so closely. You might not know who are the top players for England, or you might not even know what their who they played in every game. But there's a feeling of identity, and that also can translate into emotion. The Alter Rebbe really advises to use both tools and to use them in tandem with each other. It's not either or, because one is more long-term, the other one is more short-term.
So, okay, the gist of what you're saying essentially is these are two pathways to generate emotions, two separate thought processes. One is more intellectual and one is more primal, maybe. One is more visceral. Understood. I think, yeah. Yeah. So my next question to you is, Shais, Rabbi Taub, how it's a personal question, and it is basically because I really, what you said before resonated very much, I think, with everyone here, but I can speak for myself. The idea that knowledge is only as helpful as its impact. What's your process for contemplation?
I use both. I mean, you're saying for the contemplation stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, because I definitely use both methods, the more cerebral as well as the more primal. But if you're asking what's my process for the cerebral method, first of all, I know that if I don't put grain in the mill, it's not going to put out flour. You got to put grain in the mill in order that the mill should produce flour. So if I'm not studying Torah, I don't have anything to meditate on. So that's one thing. And that means specifically not just studying Jewish law, as important as that is, or the Talmudic discussions, as important as that is, but studying actually topics about God, about my soul, about life, about meaning, the types of things that are discussed in the Hasidic texts. So I've got to keep that information fresh. And then I'll take a walk. Different people are comfortable meditating different ways. I think a lot of times we become intimidated. I don't know the truth is, I don't know if everyone here has these same biases, but for someone, let's say, who grew up in a Hasidic milieu, sometimes you imagine meditation as something that's so grandiose. It's like you imagine, the super daveners, like those guys who the whole Shabbos, they would, for hours, before they would even open the prayer book, they'd be sitting there for hours, sitting on the bench in one spot, and they were meditating for hours. And we become, I think, intimidated. We think, well, how can I do that? I want to tell you something. If you got to take a walk around the block, take a walk around the block. You want to go sit on the couch, take your shoes off. I don't, especially in this generation, I don't think we can be so formal to say that meditation has to look any particular way. The main thing is that you're engaged. And I also want to bring up a point, because I think a lot of people have heard meditation in other contexts, especially in like Eastern mystical traditions, where they try to banish discursive thought. They empty the mind. This is not that at all, because we're actually inviting discursive thought. We are having a discussion with ourselves in our head. So we're not trying to empty our minds. This is not a relaxation technique, although the outcome may be that it leads to relaxation. But this is not, quiet your mind, get relaxed. This is, no. Engage your mind. Talk to yourself about an idea. And that's what I'll do. I'll ask myself, okay, I just studied this line from this discourse. That's what it said in Hebrew. How do I say that in English? How would I explain that with a metaphor? Kinds of things that, I'll tell you something, the kinds of metaphors that I use when I'm giving a class, half of that stuff was stuff I came up with in order to talk to myself, to get my own self to understand these ideas. So that's for me, that's the process.
Okay, wow. Can I ask you, let me go even further, because what I love about this conversation is how real it's getting. And I think that's ultimately the ideal. In your work with others, or maybe even if you're comfortable sharing personally, because I think we've described the concept, we described the process, but what does it look like in real time? Can you describe one of those conversations? Maybe something that is an example from others or yourself, where you worked through something through this process and you went from point A to point B. I don't know if you're comfortable doing that, but the idea would be to do like a live demo of what that conversation looks like.
Sure, yeah, I'd be very comfortable doing it. So, you could take an abstract concept like God is creating the world something from nothing every single second. Okay, so that's a very deep idea, to say the least. How do I meditate on that? There was a Fabrengen, there was a gathering in 770 in the Lubavitch World Headquarters, and it was a Shabbos, and it was getting late in the afternoon. It was the winter time, like this time of year actually. So Shabbos ends early, and there were a group from Israel they had a flight out of JFK that night. And in the middle of the gathering, the Rebbe was addressing hundreds, maybe thousands of people who were there. The Rebbe said, there are people here right now who are not really here because mentally they're already packing their bags and calling a cab and going to JFK because they need to catch a flight tonight. So the Rebbe said, now this group, these were Hasidic Jews Chabad Hasidic Jews specifically, who had studied Tanya. So that's why the next thing that Rebbe said was directed toward them. He said, being that they are students of Chabad Hasidic teachings, surely they've studied the second volume of Tanya, where it describes the fact that God is creating the world something from nothing every single second. And if they would think about the fact that God is creating the world something from nothing every single second, they would realize that the plane that they're thinking about right now does not yet exist, because it hasn't been created yet. It'll be created in the second that they need it. But right now, the only thing they need to know about is right here, right now. So I've done that kind of thought process many times. And it can be something as minor as I'm caught in traffic, a minor inconvenience, to something that's much more serious, something that's a real challenge. I mean, we all know where God hits us, when he wants to challenge us. There are 3 areas of blessing, and those 3 areas are the areas where we feel the most challenged. That's family matters, health, and livelihood. So, either family or health or money. Those are the issues. So let's say I'm experiencing some type of distress in one of those areas. I will think to myself, this situation right now is being created something from nothing at this second. I will think to myself that everything is exactly where it needs to be for now, right now. Now, that's not fatalism, because I believe that a second from now, God can create everything drastically differently. But from now, for this second, it is what it is. And I need to show up for it. And I need to be present for it, and not to bemoan what I think should be the present, because this is not the present that God, the present that I'm wishing for. That's not the present. I have to embrace the reality as it is now, and don't put myself in bemoaning the past. Don't put myself in fearing the future. And so I will think about this ostensibly very deep idea, which sounds very abstract, but I use this to get emotionally grounded. But I want to make another point here, which I think is very, very important. Because I was speaking about it, I was answering your question as you asked it. So I was speaking about how I use it in response to a situation. But I want to make sure it's understood, because this is incredibly important, not only to do this reactively, but to do this proactively as a regimen. And that it has to be part of our lives. Yeah, we can do it in response to a particular stress, but the best thing is, just make this part of your day. And that's why in our tradition, there is a reason, our sages were very smart. They understood the human condition. There's a reason we're supposed to pray before we go to work. There's a reason why we're supposed to start the day with spirituality, meditation, deep thought before we expose ourselves to all the stimuli that's out there in the world. So if you can make, and I don't want to put this on people like a should, where if they don't do it this way, then they don't do it at all. Get it in wherever you can get it in. But if you can spend even a minute in thoughtful meditation, preferably as a preparation for prayer, if you can create a ritual in your life where before you check your email, before you expose yourself to the world, you sit down and you say the morning blessings, express your gratitude. One of the morning blessings is a blessing on Torah study, and then go study Torah. You can study for 2 minutes, study for 5 minutes, whatever you can do. And then, take a walk or sit down in a chair and have your morning coffee or whatever drink you like, and just think for a minute. And for the men, put on tefillin, say Shema, and then expose yourself to the world. You'll set yourself up beforehand to have so much more emotional stability when things happen, because you'll already have contextualized your day. It's already, you created a framework that God is a reality and he's the creator and everything that's happening is his creation. And now I can deal with it. I can show up for it. So it's really, if you can do that in the morning and ritualize it and make it sacred, it's so powerful. It's just very powerful.
So the idea is that by creating that grounding, well, you were talking about the particular idea that the world is created anew every moment. If you can contemplate on that, for example, at the beginning of the day, carry that power or that reflection throughout the day, you'll be operating from a position of greater groundedness. One quick, I don't know how much, do we have another 5 minutes?
It's getting close to sunset here, and I have to pray the afternoon prayer.
But in this moment, I'm kidding.
This moment, right? So
two things. First of all, what texts are your favorite texts, go-to texts? If you were to choose 5 books, 5 texts that you would recommend.
5?
Yeah.
Okay. So Tanya, definitely Tanya. Tanya is the lexicon. Like, if you know the terminology of Tanya, it opens up a whole new world for you. So that's definitely a big one. Another one is Shara B'Tochen. It's not a Hasidic text. It's from 500 years before Hasidism, but it's a portion of Chayvis Halavavis, the duties of the heart. And it specifically speaks about how to cultivate more confidence in God, more trust, how to let go and let God a little bit more gracefully. That's definitely a powerful one. And then I would say, if I'm picking specific texts, I would say a few discourses of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. One of them I mentioned, L'cha Doidi, which is the marriage mimer, the discourse for marriage, definitely highly recommended. I would say another one is B'yem Ashtei Asher Yom Nasi Livnei Asher, which is a discourse that Rebbe recited on his birthday, and it's all about the relationship between the soul and God, how God chooses us and we choose him. And then if I have to pick, I got one more to pick. I would say probably Basi Lagani, the first discourse that Rebbe delivered in 1951 when he accepted leadership officially, because there it describes our collective mission and individual mission of making this world holier than heaven. So those would be my 5.
I just want to say to all of our viewers that I know that you've given shiurim lessons on Tanya and Shara B'Tochen. I imagine you've done the same for the Rebbe's Maimer, B'yem Ashtei Asher, and Basi Lagani.
Yeah, not all of it's recorded, but Basi Lagani is recorded. Yeah, on my website.
All of that can be found, friends, on
soulwords.org.
Soulwords.org. That was not a planned plug, but it's one that was super.
It was organic.
It was organic. I think we have a question from Rabbi Kalmenson, and then we'll wrap up, because I know Rabbi Taub, you have to. Let me just try to Let me figure this out. Okay. You're going to have to unmute yourself for Benison.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Shkoyach, Rabbi Taub. It's the first time I've heard you speak about Tanya like this. Really, really fascinating. I've been teaching Tanya now for about 10 years, senior girls. So I'm very interested in your subject. I would say that Tanya is the most radical sefer since the Torah was given. That's quite a radical statement, and I'll argue that through. How do you deal with monotony? It's a question that comes up amongst the girls quite frequently. The repetitive nature of prayer. How do you deal with that? How do you make that interesting and refreshing?
Yeah. So let me first say that the answer to these are girls who have been praying from the prayer book their whole lives, and they were brought up this way. And I want to make sure that it's understood for different people, we'd have different answers. Somebody who just started praying from a prayer book, I would tell them, say the parts that are meaningful to you, and don't worry about saying the parts that are not meaningful to you. And hopefully with time, they'll find more and more meaningful. With people who have been praying their whole lives, one advice I give them, and I saw this actually from the Frierdiker Rebbe. He said actually this was something that the Oivdim, that the spiritual, the deep spiritual workers, people used to work on themselves, they used to do. And that is that they take a certain portion every day, a different part of the prayers, and say that with extra focus. So I would advise, look, accept the fact that you're not going to say all of the prayers with a lot of excitement. Okay, so you do what you do. Sometimes you just show up to show that you care. Sometimes you show Hashem that you're engaged, but you show up and these are the words he wants, and this is what you say. And does it have to be so heartfelt? I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say, no, it doesn't always have to be so heartfelt. But can I take a paragraph, let's say a paragraph, and study it? And obviously you have to do this beforehand to be prepared. Take one paragraph. Take the song of the day, let's say, the different paragraph that you say from the Psalms every day. Or take a paragraph from the Psukei de Zimra. Take the song of the sea. Take whatever. It doesn't take one of the blessings from the 18 blessings of the Amidah, of the standing prayer. Take one thing, study it, and let that be your highlight where you feel engaged and you feel stimulated. And I feel like that's a process that's attainable and hopefully scalable, that will lead to increased results down the line.
By the way, actually, Rabbi Taub, I saw a story where the Rebbe told exactly that to somebody who asked exactly this question, that while every day you should pray the entirety of the prayers, he was talking to someone who that was his norm. Every day choose one paragraph to focus on, and after you become fluent in its meaning and you're able to integrate its energy and its content into your consciousness, as it were, then move to the next and so forth.
Yeah.
In any event, I want to take this opportunity, Rabbi Taub, to thank you profoundly for your time, for your expertise, for your wisdom, and for unpacking something abstract and turning it into something that's relatable, that's resonant, and that's actually eminently practical. So thank you so much, Rabbi Taub. Friends, once again, soulwords.org. If you'd like to see, read, or hear more, I have personally benefited from Rabbi Taub's shiurim, and I would very much recommend each one of us taking the time to incorporate some of those teachings into their lives. Thank you so much, my dear Rabbi Taub. Looking forward to connecting again soon.
God willing, soon.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Wishing you all a wonderful evening and lots of success on your spiritual journey of contemplation.
Amen.